I think the danger for them is that so far it's looking slightly as if the sort of purity test of those Tory Eurosceptics will determine the Conservative leadership contest.
It's Matt Jolly still joined by Rachel Sylvester and Patrick Maguire. Well, let's turn our attention then to the Conservatives and how they might approach the coming months. We've had some suspected leadership contenders on the telly over the weekend, but all of them insist on they're just popping in for a chat. This is Robert Jenrick and Victoria Atkins on the BBC and Suella Braverman on GB News.
I honestly don't think that 3 days on from a general election in which we've just lost so many of our friends and colleagues, that it is right to have self-indulgent conversations like this.
This weekend is not about leadership. I mean, for anyone at this stage to be talking about their own ambitions goes to what we were talking about at the very beginning of this, which is politics and the Conservative Party. I think genuinely at this point in time, it does not and should not be about personalities and about people.
We have the luxury of being in opposition. There is no urgency to install a new leader.
The luxury of being in opposition. I'm sure that's how everyone views it, Rachel.
That's fascinating, isn't it? So I think this is all about, obviously they're all running, but
they're not running, Rachel. They said they were quite clear. They just happened to pop into Laura Kuenssberg's studio on a Sunday morning.
But that really reminded me of the sort of Corbyn era. Is it the purity of opposition you enjoy or the kind of compromises required by power? And that is the test for the Conservative Party now. Who are they talking to? Are they talking to themselves? Are they thinking about, realignment of the right and coalitions with Nigel Farage, as Suella Braverman has already talked about, welcoming him into the party? Or are they looking at the broad electorate and trying to think, how do we win those voters back across the country, not just on the Tory right? And I think the danger for them is that so far it's looking slightly as if the sort of purity test of those Tory Eurosceptics will determine the Conservative leadership contest.
And going back to the thing you were talking about before, Patrick, there's a sort of tension, isn't there? On the one hand, a longer leadership contest where they all sort of actually have a good think about what the future of the Conservative Party looks like might be good for the party. But if you're not careful, you vacate the pitch of the Labour Party to define you in a way that you then can't shake off.
Yeah, and there's also a risk that a long leadership election leads you too far into introspection, particularly if party members are involved. Think about two examples from the past decade on the Labour side. 2010, they ended up with Ed Miliband, and that was partly a quirk of the system they used at the time. The unions elected him, but there was definitely a sense that, look, Ed Miliband is the person who will break with New Labour and take the party back to its something resembling its roots. Then you had that times 100 with Jeremy Corbyn in 2015. Now, both of those leadership elections were very long. And there's a risk here that the Tories overcomplicate what's happened. And Rachel, I think, hit the nail on the head by saying it will become a Eurosceptic right-wing purity test. And you're already hearing that from people like Suella Braverman, when really, and I think Robert Jenrick on the BBC yesterday was closer to this. Why have they failed? Why were they punished so badly? Because they said they'd do a load of things and didn't do them. It wasn't that, the things they said weren't sufficiently right-wing. It's that they promised to deal with immigration. They promised to deal with the NHS. They promised to level up the country. They didn't do it. Oh, and they were spectacularly corrupt and incompetent along the way, is how many voters will have seen it. So there's a risk they overcomplicate this and lead themselves further down some sort of cul-de-sac that's going to take them away from voters, when actually there is an opportunity here to get into a really focused place in opposition and start challenging what could be quite quickly an unpopular government. So I would take the view, probably, given all we've seen, when was the last time they elected an election winner was elected after a long leadership contest? 2020 Labour leadership contest was quite long, although Keir Starmer had that sewn up. And
2005, but we have to go back to where there was a long, but then that came after a long period of opposition. If they do want to try and turn it around in a single term. Emma's been in touch saying, will there be a shadow cabinet appointed? Well, this is the other problem, is that Rishi Sunak, as the still leader of the Tory party, presumably will have to mount some sort of opposition in the absence of a leadership contest. And half of his cabinet aren't MPs anymore.
Yeah, it's extraordinary, isn't it? And actually, quite a few of the potential contenders for the Tory leadership, Penny Mordaunt or Grant Shapps, who are held out by that sort of slightly more moderate wing as possible cheerleaders. But yes, are they going to have the people to, sit on select committees to really hold the government to account? And the whole balance of power with so few MPs is going to be dramatically different. It's going to be a huge shock for the Conservative Party. I saw it just the week before the election. I did a couple of events with Conservative and Labour front benches, and the Tories turned up with, the armoured car, the aides, the officials all fluttering around. The shadow cabinet turned up, Labour at that point turned up with, one aide and a dog sort of thing virtually. Now that's reversed.
Total reversal,
all the power is with the government, which is now Labour, and the Tories are kind of on their own.
And then, there will be interest in the Conservative Party, although they will quickly discover that it's much less interest than they've been used to. And the other thing they've got to compete with is that there are all these other interesting things going on in the House of Commons now. You've got the Liberal Democrats now on over 70 MPs. You've got Nigel Farage and 5 Reform UK MPs. You've got the Greens on 4 MPs. You've got then also the sort of, the SNP down to whatever it was, 10 MPs they've got left. Who of those groupings do you think will be the most interesting, Rachel?
Well, it's interesting that a lot of attention on the Conservative side will be focusing on Reform and Nigel Farage. But actually, of course, the Greens have almost as many MPs. And that will be, and then there are the independents, if you pile them in as well, on many of which are more on the left of Labour.
There were sort of hard left alternatives to a Labour MP.
I mean, in a way, it's a parliament that signifies the fragmentation and the volatility of our politics, doesn't it? That those old tribal allegiances have completely broken down post-Brexit, and people are now voting more emotionally, partly on particular issues, but also against the sort of big established parties.
And then, Patrick, does that become complicated for Keir Starmer because he'll be attacked by the hard right of Reform, by the whatever right-wingness that the Tory party comes up with, the sort of soft left of the Lib Dems, the more left wing of the Greens, the even more left wing of the Alternatives. Would there be a moment, do you think, where a policy comes along where all of those people can mount criticism, which might then be able to pick off some Labour MPs? I mean, clearly he's got a big majority, but he still doesn't want a headache of a rebellion.
Yeah, I wrote in the Times in the World's Worst column at 5 p.m. World's Worst. I actually think it's quite a good column. The World's Worst timed column on 5 p.m. on Thursday. That one of the scenarios Keir Starmer's team fear is a sort of popular front of opposition that spans left to right on issues like the 2-child benefit cap. Look, Nigel Farage has said it should be lifted. Suella Braverman has said it should be lifted. The SNP. The Lib Dems, the Greens, these Gaza independents will all say, let's lift the 2-child benefit cap. How do you respond to that? And how do you maintain the line that, look, things are tough and we need prudence with a purpose, as Gordon Brown would have put it. And I think the really difficult thing for Keir Starmer is that in a parliamentary majority, with a parliamentary majority, parliamentary opposition matters less, but we will understand all of these new forces in terms of what they can do to make his life more difficult, i.e. which Labour MPs they make uncomfortable. You have about 80 of them with Reform in second place. You have about 30 of them with the Greens in second place. Lots of them will be worried about independent challenges to their left. Some Tory seats are quite marginal. So while, we're not going to be seeing a Labour government lose votes, he is going to be pulled in lots of different directions in terms of his political direction and messaging. And I know that work is already going on in Number 10 to try and find a message that can speak to all of those groups at once. And that's going to be a tricky thing. And it's all going to be about, making tangible improvements to people's lives quite quickly. But that is also going to mean that they are going to have some very tough discussions about what money they do have, how they spend it, where, on whom, and what they then say about that money and what it's for. It's going to be really tricky. And, we're absolutely right to be talking about fragmentation because, the more individual audiences you have, the harder it is to unite them with one message.
I think also you're already hearing talk of a sort of permanent campaign, if you like. Strategists already thinking about the next general election in 5 years' time. And that's a danger for Starmer. He's got to start doing stuff that is controversial now. He can't be acting with one eye on, that electoral coalition for the next general election, because the danger is if he doesn't do the difficult things right at the start, he's going to run out of time, and he's going to have to do them as he gets to the election. So, after the Ming Vase campaign, we can't have a Ming Vase administration. There's got to be some bravery and boldness now, I'd say.